You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was the meditation at our Christmas Eve Candlelight gathering on December 24th, 2025. Thanks for tuning in. Good evening, friends. Well, there's something about Christmas Eve that softens us, isn't there? Even those of us who might arrive a little tired or a little guarded, a little unsure of why we're here in this sanctuary tonight in this torrential downpour, something in us is invited to loosen up tonight. Maybe it's the familiar Christmas story, the one read in A Charlie Brown Christmas. Maybe it's the music. Maybe it's the fact that the lights are low and we're about to trust one another with an open flame. But there's something about Christmas Eve that feels thick, you know? Not heavy, but somehow full, like the air itself is holding something. You can feel it in a house where children are trying unsuccessfully to fall asleep, where gifts sit wrapped and waiting, where tomorrow presses so close it's almost leaning into the room. Whispers after bedtime, joy humming just beneath the surface. Nothing has happened yet, and still everything feels full, as if the night itself is holding its breath. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's fitting because the story that we tell on this night each year isn't a story about God arriving with power or certainty or control. It's a story about love drawing in close to the ground, so close, in fact, that the divine is located in a human life, close enough to be held in the arms of a new mother. Now, for those of us in 2025, it's worth remembering that the Christmas story didn't emerge in calm or stable times, right? These stories appear late in the New Testament tradition, and they were actually written down after Jerusalem had fallen to Rome, after the Jewish people had been scattered, and after their hope had worn thin. Which means these stories were told to people who had lost their center, people who wondered whether peace was still possible, people who were living under the violence of empire and displacement and grief and exhaustion. In other words, these stories were told in a time of crisis. Can anyone relate here in 2025? No, we don't know anything about that, do we? In many ways, our world feels like it's in one of those moments. So many of the structures we trusted to hold us, whether political or ecological or even our social fabric, feel fragile or frayed. And many of us are quietly wondering whether peace, belonging, or some shared future are still possible for us. It can feel like we too are living after something has fallen, where we're still searching for our footing here and now. So Luke begins by naming the nature of their crisis plainly. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus, right? Caesar Augustus. A census, a political decision made far away. A reminder that ordinary lives are often rearranged by forces beyond their control. Mary and Joseph are required to move and to comply, to travel while pregnant, and to adapt while they're still vulnerable. So Christmas doesn't begin in serenity, it begins in upheaval, in lives being turned upside down. But the paradox of Christmas is that this kind of situation is precisely where love is needing to be born. What if the heart of Christmas isn't solely about God visiting humanity, but what if it's the grand reveal, an unveiling that God should no longer be conceived of as out there somewhere distant or detached, but as the sacred presence of our very lives? The birth of Jesus isn't the beginning of that truth, but rather it's the unveiling of what has always been true, that human life is precious, embodied, and worthy of divine presence. No matter your race, class, creed, political position, gender identity, or sexual orientation, the naked truth is that your life is the very birthplace of God. And if that's true, if Christmas is an unveiling rather than a one-time interruption, then the details of the story begin to glow a bit differently, don't they? A feeding trough becomes the first cradle. Shepherds working the night shift become the first witnesses. And the first words spoken into the world aren't explanations or instructions, but an announcement of presence. Do not be afraid. Not because fear disappears, but because fear is no longer the final word. Love is. This isn't a sentimental hope that asks us to look away from suffering. It's not optimism that pretends the future will fix the present without changing it. What Luke reveals is something much sturdier, older, and more intimate than that. A reality in which love is already woven into the very fabric of human life itself. This is why the story unfolds in darkness, not to romanticize love, but to tell the truth about it. Radiance is not imported from somewhere else. The light is always born from within, right in our bodies, in our very vulnerabilities, from lives that do not look impressive or complete or resolved in any way. Christmas doesn't tell us that everything will be fine. It tells us that everything belongs. That even here, especially here in your life, exactly as it is, with your fears, your doubts, your failures, your shames, that life is still capable of bearing God. And if that's true, if Christmas is an unveiling rather than a one-time interruption, then the story doesn't end with a baby in a manger a long time ago. It presses forward and it inspires something in us today. Because Christmas isn't something we're meant only to remember by telling these stories each year. It's something that we are meant to remember, to re-embody, to let the story take flesh again, here, now, in real human lives like yours and mine. It's fairly easy this time of year to remember Christmas by looking back, isn't it? By reading the story or singing the carols, by setting out the nativity scene and feeling the nostalgia. And all of that has its place. But if remembering ends there, we miss the deeper invitation of Christmas. The Christmas story isn't only about the birth of Christ, but about the ongoing birth of Christ or love in the world. It's about souls waking up to this, about people becoming midwives for one another's becoming, helping something more loving, more just, and more peaceful, and more alive take shape in the world and come into being. And this matters because Jesus isn't born into a safe world, remember? He was born into a world marked by violence, displacement, and fear. Which means Christmas doesn't ask us how to escape the world we actually inhabit. It asks us only one question. How might love take flesh directly within this world? Directly within the actual world we inhabit now, with its challenges, its injustices, and its complexities. That's why the story ends with movement. You know, the shepherds go and they see and they tell, and then they return to their actual lives, to those same fields that they watch over, to their same uncertain and precarious situation. But the difference is they return changed. Not because empire has disappeared, not because suffering has ended, but because something has been awakened within them. Because they have encountered a different way of being in the world that's been illuminated by the light of love. And so, in a few moments, we'll pass the light as a symbol of love. And this is no small thing because the light doesn't hover above us. It's especially not only a star way up in the sky. Rather, it rests in our hands. It trusts our bodies. It moves from person to person. This is the Christmas truth we sometimes resist. The light of love has no other way into the world but through us, through our voices, our care, our courage, and our willingness to stay human in hard places. The nativity scenes we set out in our homes aren't just reminders of what happened once a long time ago. They're icons of what we are being called to become here and now. People in whom love can take flesh again. People whose hearts beat for mercy and justice and peace. People who refuse to believe that hate and despair or division get the final word. And so, what I want to say this Christmas is pretty much what I want to say every Christmas. What is true of Jesus is also true of you. You were born of love. You are sustained by love, and you are invited again and again to return to love and to become that love in the world that so desperately needs it. So tonight, as the light rests in your hands, remember this. Love comes into the world exactly this way, fragile, shared, and entrusted to ordinary people like you and me. This light arrives whether the light you're holding feels strong or even if it feels faint and it barely flickers. This light of love arrives right smack dab in the middle of your ordinary life with all its complexity and longing and unresolved realities. This story tells us that even the smallest flame is enough to be a light in this world. So may we each learn to carry it gently and bravely, and may each of our lives, yours and mine, become places where that light finds a home. Amen. Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.